Welcome to Coast AM's YouTube channel. I'm George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and coasttocoastam.com. Become a Coast Insider for ad-free access to thousands of shows you'll really enjoy.
Good evening, everyone. You're in the right place at the right time. This is Coast to Coast AM, blasting out of the Mojave Desert like a Scirocco, blazing across the land, slamming into your radio like a supercharged nanoparticle of unobtainium. Greetings from the boldest, bawdiest, most outrageous city in the world, the planetary capital of sun, fun, sin, sex, and secrets, my not-so-humble hometown, Las Vegas, Nevada. My name is George Knapp, your occasional host, designated driver of the airwaves, and moderator of tonight's upcoming cacophonous cavalcade of conversation. Sunday night, football's finished, kids are tucked in, it's warm and dry inside your house or maybe in your car or your truck. Time to warp some minds, or maybe expand them a little bit. We have once again a diverse and stimulating lineup for you tonight, jam-packed with exciting tales and big ideas, the biggest, in fact. You know, for centuries, science has told us there's not much that's special about us. We evolved out of the muck on this tiny little planet in the boondocks. We're not the center of the universe, not even the focal point of our little tiny solar system. We live, we die, that's it, dust to dust. We often find ourselves at odds with mainstream science here on this program, materialistic science, physical science. You know, if it can't be weighed or measures, it's not real. So all the topics we pursue here, fleeting images, non-reproducible evidence, ethereal concepts, all that stuff is myth, folklore, it's wild imaginations run amok. It's nitwittery. Turns out, as we'll hear tonight, the smug scientists who've been lecturing the rest of us about what's real and what isn't, about the nature of reality, find themselves in quite a jam these days. Reality, as they know it, is fading fast. Maybe it's gone. The physical world that's been described to us by learned folk all these years, ever since school, basically no longer exists. It's toast. And we stand on the edge of a new understanding of reality. Tonight, in the second half, we're joined by filmmaker Rick Delano, here to give us the lowdown on a brand new film, The End of Quantum Reality. And it's like a hand grenade dropped into your cranium. It's profound and moving, and there's a lot to absorb. Going to be a fun conversation. That's coming up a little bit later. First, though, two intrepid investigators who've been on the trail of multiple mysteries, the kind we pursue here each night. Their latest work focuses on the big guy, the elusive forest dweller, swamp denizen, known by many names, Sasquatch, skunk ape. Most of us know him as Bigfoot. Chilling tales of personal encounters. Shannon LeGros is a writer and podcaster who hosts Beyond the Fray, a solid program with a loyal following. Her co-author is a writer and Marine Corps veteran, G. Michael Hopf. We're going to call him Jeff, G. Michael Hopf, better known as Jeff to his friends, and they are going to be here to share some bone-chilling stories about close-up encounters. Beyond the Fray, Bigfoot is the title of their book. Really good stories that we're about to hear just a minute or two from now. Webmaster Lex Lonehood and I have pulled together our usual assortment of items and oddities from around the world. We put it together in a feature called Knapp's News. You can find it on the Coast to Coast AM website, along with a lot of other great content, by the way. Tonight's collection includes a think piece about what truly advanced, intelligent beings might look like. And the answer is, like nothing. An astrophysicist proposes they could have evolved way past the need for physical forms or bodies, in fact, way past any form of matter at all, which, that kind of raises all kinds of interesting possibilities. Also, a science story about, get this, a bone-eating life form that's been discovered for the first time, and where it was found is pretty strange, inside the rotting corpse of an alligator that was under study. Also, an essay about predictions of the future, kind of what sci-fi writers imagined long ago what 2020 might be like. Still no flying cars, by the way. Plus, I uncorked a long-form interview we did a while back with Lou Elizondo. He's the former head of ATEP. That's the Pentagon UFO study. Little pieces of this interview have been broadcast on KLAS TV, but we posted the full interview on MysteryWire.com. You can check that out in Knapp's News. While you're on the website, look at the little icon that tells you how to become a Coast Insider. A subscription would mean you don't have to miss a single program. You can listen anytime you want, as often as you want, on multiple platforms. If you subscribe for a year, the cost is pennies a day, gives you access to this huge archive, including the Art Bell Classics. And you can subscribe to George Norrie's television program, Beyond Belief, which covers many of the same kind of topics and guests and subjects as this program does, but with video. With that, let's assume the position. Bring in the dog and the cat, the ducklings, the potbelly pig. I mean, you don't want Bigfoot to grab them, do you? Put on a pot of joe, slide your bod into the flannel jammies and bunny slippers, plop yourself down in a comfy spot, turn down the lights, and turn up the radio. In a moment, chilling encounters beyond the fray. Bigfoot. I'm George Knapp, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. Shannon LeGros has been examining the paranormal since she was a teen, having had her own personal experience, which started her on this path, one that we're going to hear about in a couple of minutes. And for the past several years, her focus has been on Sasquatch. She tries to bring a fresh perspective and an open mind to a broad spectrum of mysteries. And I recently found out she lives here in my not-so-humble hometown, Las Vegas, Nevada. G. Michael Hopf, a.k.a. Jeff, has written dozens of novels, an acclaimed and best-selling series called The New World, along with Western novels. He's a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps and a fan of rye whiskey, which is good to know. He lives with his family in San Diego. Shannon, Jeff, great to have both of you here.
Thank you, George.
Hi, George. Thank you.
Let's start with the overview. You know, I enjoyed reading your new book. I look forward to whatever you do next. These stories, they really do jump out and grab you. And you know, I think, like a lot of people, I love Bigfoot stories. Maybe I saw Harry and the Hendersons once too often, but I always think of these creatures as generally kind of shy, that they try to avoid contact with us. They don't really want to eat us or harm us. And, you know, like most people, I think I'd love to see one. But, of course, I'm saying that here from the comfort and safety of a lit room in this structure here that's nice and safe. And I'm not sitting out in the dark in a tree or in a bush all alone in some spooky forest. And the stories that are told in this book seem to have a similar theme. People who really want to see Bigfoot, they go out of their way to go find him, to go out trudging around in the wilderness. And then once it happens, they regret their decision. That pops up again and again, right, Shannon?
Yeah, this book is laden with regret after, as you said, they've almost become obsessed, whether it was a movie or a story they heard or a book they read, and it was all they could think about, and then they have it actually happen, and it's changed their life, and in a lot of ways, some of these folks didn't even go back into the woods again.
Jeff, I'm going to get to Shannon's personal encounter in a moment here. Have you had one yourself? What drew you to this particular mystery?
Well, I've always been fascinated with Bigfoot, Sasquatch, ever since I was a small child, as well as all things kind of paranormal and kind of the mysteries that are out there. So I've been a fan of yours, by the way, George. So it's an honor to be on the show, as well as Art Bell. I grew up with him. And was also a fan of listening to Shannon's show, Into the Fray. And kind of our partnership kind of started over the summer when I just reached out to her and looking at the content she has, and thought if I could bring my expertise as a writer and a novelist and bring that to bear and then take her content and turn it into a different medium for people to have access to.
Shannon, share with us your story. You tell it in the book here. You're a teenager. Had you given any thought to Bigfoot or paranormal or UFOs or any of that stuff prior to the encounter you're about to share with us?
Not really. I think I had, as a kid, maybe picked up a book or two about a Ouija board or a haunted house or something, but it wasn't really something I was very focused on. And, you know, being here in Las Vegas, a lot of people in this area, they like to go to Utah, specifically an area called Duck Creek, which is up on Cedar Mountain, just up from Cedar City, Utah. And it's, you know, a nice little 4.5, 5-hour jog out there, so it's pretty easy to get to. And my dad had a cabin in Duck Creek, and we actually would go out there pretty much almost nearly every weekend that I was with him, and then, of course, for weeks over the summertime. And so this was somewhere around, I was 12 or 13, as you mentioned. I was a teenager, so around 92. So there you go. You can figure out my age, everybody. When we were out at the cabin, we would pretty much be found doing one of two things, either fishing or riding on our four-wheelers. And riding the four-wheelers was great in that area because there was little traffic, except the roads were a little dusty. Nothing was paved up where all of these cabins were. So on this particular day, and people will realize why I mentioned the goggles if they have ever ridden on a dirt bike or a four-wheeler, because it does block your vision. But on this particular morning, my father said, all right, I'm going down to Cedar City. We knew he'd be gone for several hours. And so myself and my brother and my stepbrother decide to hop on our four-wheelers and take a little ride around. So Dad wasn't home, so Shannon doesn't feel like wearing her goggles. So I did not do that. And because the roads are dusty, I hung back from my brother and stepbrother. And mind you, it's a beautiful day, clear skies, it's sunny, it's somewhere around 11 or noon. And Duck Creek is covered in, especially that whole portion of Utah really, is covered in aspen trees, and there's not a whole lot of ground brush like you'd find somewhere in Ohio. And we are on our four-wheelers, and as per usual, we're probably riding a little faster than we should. And I look off to my right into the woods, and clear as day, I see 4 absolutely pitch black. They look like people, but I knew immediately they were not. What we would just call a shadow person, simply today. It's very well known. Back then I had no clue except, number one, okay, that looks very strange. There was no definable shape to them. That was the first mark as them being very odd and out of place. The second one was, and of course they're a little taller than they should be, and no light could find these things whatsoever, like cutouts from the deepest, darkest, blackest night. And here they are running through the woods. They're paralleling me. They're probably maybe 30 feet into the woods. So the next thing is I notice they're running as if the trees aren't there, and that's kind of hard to explain even still today every time I say it. It's weird to say because it's not like I didn't see them go through the trees per se. It's just they didn't have to dodge them at all. So that was the second thing. And the third thing happened after I had to check my path, of course, because I'm still riding very quickly on my four-wheeler. These things are keeping pace with me, by the way. But when I check my path, I look back, and now they're gone. So you add all that up, and the sighting was really only about 5 seconds. And, of course, if you do count that out, it's a good long clip to see something that odd. And at that age, I certainly knew I didn't see people. So I caught up to my brother and my stepbrother, and I said, okay, I'm going back to the cabin. I'm done riding. They're like, what are you talking about? We just got started here. And it bothered me. I wouldn't say I was terrified. And I think that, and this is something that comes up again and again when I talk to people, and I'm sure it does for you too, George, when something that odd interacts with you, I think it changes the whole experience. And I think if any one of them had looked, I got the sense, I don't think they would have had faces, but if I got the sense they looked at me, or waved at me or whatever the situation was, I think I would have had a different perception of it. It did change my life, though, because after that, I became as obsessed as you could be moving through your teen years and getting distracted by other things. But that was really the only thing, except for a couple of other interesting things since I've gotten into all this really heavily in the last 6-7 years. But that is really the only thing I've ever seen with my own eyes that absolutely blew me away. And when I got back to the cabin and my dad got home, I told him what I saw, and he's ex-military. So he said, they do military exercises out here all the time. It was just guys in military outfits. And I'm kind of going, yeah, well, I guess they have some pretty amazing technology out there because those were not people from what I could tell. So, and he still remembers me telling him that story. And he goes, and I still kind of don't believe you. And that's okay. I'm used to that.
And 5 seconds changed the course of your life.
Yes, indeed.
Jeff, you're a military guy, or you were a military guy. Could it have been military folks on some kind of exercise out there?
You know, when I've heard Shannon's story, she's told it to me, and I don't believe it was at all. No.
And you haven't had anything similar of your own, what you'd call paranormal?
I've had interesting things happen to me from like more of a apparitions and things like that growing up. I was raised back in Maryland, and so I've had some interesting tales like that. Nothing actually kind of manifested itself to me, but hearing things, displaced voices, things like walking in houses and things like that. That all happened when I was younger.
I'm not sure which of you wrote this section. It might have been you, Shannon, but it occurred to me as I'm reading sort of the modern history of Bigfoot. You've got a distinct date when Bigfoot essentially was born, at least the modern era, 1958, when this newspaper story appears in Northern California with the loggers up there, the guys cutting the road through a logging area, and Bigfoot is essentially born. The name sticks. It's kind of like the UFO story starting with Kenneth Arnold in June 1947. And in fact, in both topics, both subjects, the fact is that there were occurrences long before either of those incidents ever happened. Right, Shannon?
Absolutely. And, something that I bring up to people that are very skeptical of Bigfoot, which they should be. It's always good to have a skeptical eye about these things, especially when after all this time, we don't have a body. We don't even have a piece of a body or really some true DNA that science will put a stamp on. But something that I love to bring up is the fact that we have documentation that goes back, we're talking the 1800s, and this was before everybody could hop on Facebook and get information instantly out to one another across continents all around the world. So when these descriptions match up, especially from even tribes that even now today they wouldn't even know what Facebook was, and bless them for that. They have a good reprieve, I would say, sometimes. But all of the descriptions match so insanely perfect that it's really hard to dismiss things like that when it comes to Bigfoot.
Well, it goes way back in North America and in fact, all over the world. I don't know if it's everywhere, but it's on most of the continents as far as I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? And one of my favorite things to ask people would be, what would be your perfect sighting? And that can be a tough question to answer. I mean, have you ever thought about that, George? Because I know you also love the subject of Bigfoot. You've talked about it many a times. What would your perfect sighting look like if you had one?
It would be me safe behind bulletproof glass, having a cup of coffee, watching a family of them go by the window.
Yeah.
Jeff, tell me this. Of all the stories that you helped Shannon write in this book, which one grabs you the most?
It's the one that we have titled Scarface.
Right.
And there's a couple of reasons for it. It's definitely a chilling story, but also where it takes place. It takes place in Bear Mountain State Park, which is 50 miles north of New York City. So it sits right on the Hudson River. And what's fascinating about it, because it's proximity to, the largest, city in the United States, not that far away. Yet this guy named Chris, at the time he was 13, he and his friend were on a day trip. This is like during summer, like a summer day camp. And he lived in northern New Jersey. They take this day camp, the bus full of kids that go up to Bear State Mountain Park. And after they're hiking around a little while, he and his friend decide they're going to go smoke a cigarette, but they want to kind of sneak off and go do that so there's none of the chaperones or adults see them. And as they're hiking down this trail, his name is Chris, by the way. Chris stops and turns. I think he's trying to, if I remember, he's lighting his cigarette, and his friend is stops and looks sees something, turns and just races away. Chris isn't sure what's going on. He turns expecting to see a bear, and there, not 10 feet from him, was this massive creature with gray hair. Now, what's really chilling about this is in I think it was the right hand of the creature was half of the dog. Like the dog had been ripped in half. So essentially, like, he was holding it by its neck. And then in his other half was he couldn't tell whether it was a blanket or an article of clothing was in the other hand. And he stood and stared at this thing for a period of time. He actually got a good description of it. And the reason it's called Scarface is that the creature had a scar across its forehead and then one across its cheek. It was pretty deep, pretty substantial scar.
I'll tell you what, Jeff, hold on. We're going to have to take a break. We'll pick up that story on the other side. We're talking with Shannon and Jeff about Beyond the Fray Bigfoot, their new book. Some really great stories still to come. We're hearing some stories of encounters that happened often in the woods, and the meetings were unplanned, in some cases completely surprising. Others were planned. Folks go out there on purpose, go out of their way to go find Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them. And then when they finally do have an encounter, they regret it. And we're about to hear why. Hopf will continue his story, and then we'll hear from Shannon LeGros about some of her favorite encounters from their new book, Beyond the Fray Bigfoot. We'll be right back. Jeff, my apologies for interrupting. I didn't time that story very well, but I'd like you to continue the story of Scarface, the Bigfoot creature known as Scarface.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. So I think I left this where Chris is standing 10 feet from this creature that stands about 10 feet tall and about 5 feet wide. So you can imagine there's just this massive creature that's hovering over him. And, again, in one hand is half of a dog. And the other is, again, it's either a blanket or an article of clothing. So it took him a while to finally, when he's standing there, so he's 13 years old, and he says he was pretty short at the time, and he's like, the top of his head probably reached right around kind of the waistline of this creature. And it took him all, I think at the time, I think he described like it felt like an eternity to kind of get the courage to finally look up at the face of this thing. And because even though he was terrified, he still had this desire to see specifically what it was and like look into its face. And he did that, and that's when he saw the scars. And the thing was like giving him a scowl, looking down at him. And then he looked back down, and then again found the courage again because he was frozen in place. He mentions this, like he was just like frozen in fear, like he couldn't move. But yet he finally had the courage, turned around, and just raced back. Fortunately, the creature didn't pursue him, and he gets back. He finds his friend. His friend is clearly shaken. They don't really discuss it. They eventually get back on the bus, and they're heading back. And he's talking to his friend, like, "What do you think that was?" And his friend did not want to talk about it. Even to this day, his friend won't discuss it. But what it did for Chris, though, is that while it terrified him, it also kind of it made him genuinely want to know what this creature was, and he started doing his own research. And there's another story in the book that Chris has, that we have of Chris. And this time, instead of accidentally running into a creature, he goes in pursuit of it. But because it just brings it almost kind of like what happened with Shannon and her experience when she was young. It altered his life and set him on a path to now try to discover and research what the creature is.
Jeff, in your research for this book, have you heard of a story where a Bigfoot kills somebody's pet dog? I guess when I read that story, I was hoping maybe it was roadkill, and that's why he had half of a dog in his hand. I have heard accounts of a Bigfoot attacking livestock, but I didn't know about pets. What about you?
Well, I would. Well, in this case, I think we don't know where the creature got, the dog from. But if we're to think the creature is just an animal, and the animal has to eat, and I'm imagining it's not just a vegetarian, it's not a vegan. It probably consumes, animal products, and if it can't get, say, a deer or maybe cattle or whatever, it might just be an opportunist. And so I think it's plausible to believe that if it encounters a dog and if it's hungry, it might kill the dog. And so and consume it. I know that's not something people want to hear about, but there have been other cases I have heard where people's pets will go out to try to engage something's in the woods that might be there, and they've gotten killed. So I've heard about those cases before. We don't have any of those documented in the book, but I think it's definitely plausible that this creature could definitely kill people's pets.
Well, I'm being silly. I'm being me is, when I watch a movie, a spooky movie, and there's a dog in it, my first out loud statement is, don't hurt the dog.
That's right.
You can go ahead and hurt the people. Shannon, could you share with us the first story that is told in the book? It's called Boundaries Crossed, about a guy named David. And I don't know if you wrote this for David, but it's so well written and so crisp in how you describe this encounter. This is a guy who went looking for trouble.
Yeah, he did. And this is one of the best examples of someone going out for the purposes of, I must see a Sasquatch. It is an obsession of mine to see one, and he truly regrets it. So, and this, something about the book, just quickly to mention, is that many of these I did speak to for my show. However, there are several in the book that they didn't feel comfortable to come on the show, so they just got a hold of me and Jeff through email and over the phone privately. So there are a number of surprise stories in here for people, even if they're familiar with Into the Fray. But this particular show, it was titled Boundaries Crossed, just like in the book, and this was from a man named David. So at this time, he was in his 20s, and for the show, so nor for the book did I disclose the location of this encounter. But he admits that he was really into monster movies and books ever since he was young. And he actually, in the course of getting into Bigfoot, he befriends a very prominent Bigfoot researcher, which, again, going to keep his real name out of this as well. But the researcher becomes David's mentor, and they spend hours and hours and hours in the woods, and the mentor tells David that to him these were just gentle giants of the woods. They're not out there to hurt us, just be respectful, everything will be cool. So he admits, that was his opinion because that's what his mentor said. So the year is 2001, I believe, and they are in a very well-known area for Bigfoot activity. I'll just say that. And the mentor pulls out a map. They always carry a topo map with them. And mentor draws a circle around a particular area and says, you are not ever to go here. And David's kind of like, okay, why is that? And he says, well, I believe this is where they live. And obviously, they roam wherever they want, but he just meant that this is probably like their house, probably some kiddos around there, because the mentor had mentioned that he had had some encounters in the area, and it almost always involved juveniles, younger Bigfoot. So David takes in this information. He goes home. He lives 6 hours away, and immediately makes plans to make a solo trip. And when I say solo, I don't just mean that he went back solo. I meant like really solo, to where he didn't tell anybody, even his wife. And not only did he not tell her, but he lied to her and told her he's going on a business trip. So literally no one knows where he's going. So he drives the 6 hours back to this location from home. He parks and he hikes. It was about 45 minutes to the location and settles into where he figures he's inside this forbidden circle. And he didn't even pack much. He's like, I was just going to go in for the day, maybe into the evening a little, hike back out, go home, no big deal. So he's got like some snacks and some water. And he sits and he actually, the birds are chirping, everything's cool. And he actually kind of feels like he's getting a little bored. So he's like, well, I drove all the way out here, 6 hours. I may as well just spend the night. I'm a little tired anyway. The nightfall was coming. So he does, in fact, fall asleep. And he doesn't know how long, but it's dark by the time he wakes up because he is awakened by some sort of movement. And he could tell it was something extremely big. And here's where things really change for David very suddenly, because some truly horrifying screams begin to fill his ears. And I've heard others describe it like this, you probably too, George, but they say to them it sounded like a woman being murdered. someone in dire need of help or pain. And the only difference was, of course, was the volume and forcefulness of these screams. And unfortunately, also, there are screams coming from more than just one direction. And it's so dark out now that he says, I think he could barely see the hand in front of his face. And now he's completely surrounded by these amazingly loud screams. And this part got to me. This is when it got hard for him to start actually telling his story. You can hear it on my show. He said he had a flashlight. And everyone's probably, even when they first heard it going, well, turn on the flashlight and see what the heck is screaming at you. But no, he's like, number one, did I want to see them? And number two, maybe they couldn't quite see me. He figured they did, obviously, because they were hollering at him. But I think that his assumption was probably something that most of us would go through, and maybe keep it off would be safer. So he's wondering if he should run or stay. So he stands up and he takes a couple of steps towards the trail, which he came in on. It's only, I think it's 15 to 20 feet away from him at this point. And as he does this, there is another scream that is so close that he feels the concussion from the scream. And so now he drops down to his knees. He's beyond terrified at this point, and he just starts to yell, I will go. I am trying to go. Just let me go, please. I will go. And it hits him. I haven't told anybody where I've gone, and not only that, but I've lied about it. And even his friends would make fun of him because he was the Bigfoot guy, and now he's going, oh my gosh, I'm actually going to be killed by a Bigfoot, the very thing they laugh at me about, and no one's even going to know. But he's laying there, and he's not even sure how long this was. But he decides, okay, well, I can either lay here and maybe have something really horrible happen to me, or just go. He was smart enough to not run because he figures the whole predator-prey thing might catch up to him pretty quickly in this situation. And if he ran, he had backed himself up against a tree which was sitting at the top of a gorge, and those were actually all around this area, so he knew that running would be pretty bad because, again, wasn't really keen on the whole flashlight idea at this point. So, again, a tough part to hear. He begins to crawl out on his hands and knees. He's not even standing at this point, and the screams are still coming, and they've actually never stopped, which is astounding. And now at this point, he starts to hear almost constant movement in between the screams, so he knows that they're following him. He reaches the main trail and does force himself to stand and walk, not run. And he admits he's sobbing. He's not just in tears. He's actually sobbing and drenched in sweat. And he's finally cold. He's freezing cold. And he's got a 45-minute walk to his vehicle at this point still. And he hears he's being paced and was able to test this because it was something that the mentor had brought up. He tests this by he stops walking, and he hears a step or two after he stops walking. He's like, okay, I'm definitely not just imagining all these crazy things. I am being followed. Quite tactical, really, which we've heard from other witnesses. So the screams stop, and this part was so creepy, and I've heard this many a times, is about the chattering. So the screams stop, but now there's this, what they call samurai chatter. There's chatter going on. I'm not even going to try to emulate that. Other people can do it. Please don't ask me to try it. It'll be the most horrible thing you've ever heard. It won't sound anything like it. But he reaches the final portion of the trail with all of this going on, the chattering and the following, and he breaks into a flat run and gets to his vehicle. So he's out. He's out of the woods. He's fine, literally and figuratively, but he's sobbing all the way back to the hotel that he had booked for the night, and he realized the futility of what he had just done and how silly it was to do what he had done. And in fact, as you mentioned, that he got exactly what he wanted, and it really ruined him on the woods, and he didn't go back in the woods for years. And a big portion of that was because he had kids back at home, and he thought they would have thought I just left them. They would have had no clue what happened to me, and he really truly believed that if he had stayed, he may not have made it out of the woods that night. So, yeah, David has not gone back in the woods. I think it was nearly 25 years until he even stepped foot back in the woods, and he admitted it was only during the day and armed and with a group.
I don't remember from the book, but did he ever tell his mentor? Did he ever admit to his mentor he had been there against that advice?
You know what, that's a great question. I think I asked that on the show, and no, the mentor never did find out that he had done this forbidden thing and gone into the forbidden area.
Jeff, there are a lot of stories. We're going to go to a break in about 3 minutes, but there are a lot of stories of people who have been frightened nearly to death by encounters of Bigfoot, similar to the one we just heard from Shannon. Are there any credible stories of humans being attacked by them, really physically ripped up and thrown around and punched or anything like that?
There are. What's interesting about the creatures, I think that it's like any other animal, and I think that there are some. I think they can have like personalities. I know that might sound ridiculous to some people, and I think that some are violent, and some are not. Some are more curious, and there are cases, if you do research out there, of people claiming they've been attacked. Mainly, though, lots of times they'll attack structures and buildings and things like that where people are residing. And I think a lot of it comes down to territorial issues with the creature. I think it's without a doubt the creature has an area it operates in, and the minute that a human steps foot in that, and they're a little longer than it should be, the creature makes itself known and in a violent way so the human will leave.
It's like any other field. You've got yahoos who, I think in the case of Bigfoot, they go out there with guns purposely. I'm going to bag a Bigfoot. I'm going to become famous overnight. I'm going to take my 30-06 and shoot one. Have you ever heard of anybody who thinks they hit one, Jeff?
Yeah, there again. If you go and you do research and just look at people's encounters they write on certain sites and things out there, there are people that have claimed they have quote unquote bagged a Bigfoot, shot one before. Again, the thing is, there never is any physical evidence that's ever brought back. I don't know. Maybe Shannon can expand on that.
Well, we'll do it on the other side. I've seen the photos of people holding up what looks like a rug or an old bear skin or something like that, and claiming they got Bigfoot in the freezer. Like any other field, there are fakes and phonies and hoaxers. We're going to come back and hear some stories, including the one of a hunter, a Bigfoot hunter, who used a unique tool to try to attract a Sasquatch, a recording of a crying baby. That and other stories from Beyond the Fray, the Bigfoot book by Shannon LeGros and Jeff Hopp. We'll be back in a moment.
Thank you for listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows.